All right, hello everyone. Happy Thursday. Hopefully you guys are having a good day. I'm upstairs on retreat today, so if anyone needs anything after school, makeups, extra help, or what have you, I will be in my office today after school. What I wanted to do today is leave you a quick class lesson in regards to where we left off with yesterday and since the beginning of the week, and talking about the fallout from the French and Indian War. And we really talked about three things specifically leading up to today. We talked about the proclamation of 1763, which banned colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. We talked about the Sugar Act that was going to place a tax on molasses, sugar. All right, yesterday we talked about it really only being 3 cents, but still the colonists very much upset by that. And then also the Quartering Act, which wasn't an actual tax, but rather a way for the British to save money. And we had introduced yesterday the Stamp Act. Okay, now in 1765, Prime Minister of England at this time, Mr. Grenville, is coming up with creative ways to find money to help pay back that English war debt from the French and Indian War. Now, we've already talked about the Sugar Act. Is a 3 cent tax on sugar going to pay back that debt overnight? No, obviously it is peanuts in comparison to the grand scheme of things and collecting money from Parliament's end. So in 1765, they come up with the Stamp Act, the idea that specially stamped paper needs to be bought by the colonists if they so choose to produce anything. So things like newspapers or journals or what have you. Things like licenses, contracts. This would be special English produced paper, produced only in England. And it's not necessarily going to be more expensive. It's not necessarily going to be cheaper than paper that was made in the colonies, but rather the colonists were now forced to buy this paper. So we said yesterday it puts that small paper maker who lived in New York City or Philadelphia, essentially puts them out of business. And by this time, now it's the fourth thing since the French and Indian War. At a time when the colonists thought that they would be rewarded for their involvement, this is the fourth thing that is being passed. And a lot of colonists are going to start to complain and be very vocal about it. And many colonists are going to start to protest. Okay, and these protests are taking place throughout the 13 colonies in a variety of ways. Okay, they are protests where, like in Massachusetts, the Sons of Liberty get together. It's a secret organization that is going to organize protests to discuss as to why they're being treated unfairly. You have guys like Patrick Henry down in the House of Burgesses who are outraged at the fact that the English Parliament over in England, who never stepped foot in the colonies, is making decisions. And Patrick Henry is going to scream bloody murder when he says that there is to be no taxation without representation. And that's a phrase that we'll talk about a little bit more throughout the course of this chapter, and certainly a rallying cry as we get to closer to the American Revolution. But furthermore, to turn protest into action, the colonists begin to think about how can their disdain, their dislike for this act, how can they show Britain besides just simply complaining about it? And the idea behind this is that what they need to do, just like their pockets are impacted, all right, like the Sugar Act, the way to impact England's pockets is by boycotting. All right, so yesterday we talked about the idea that boycotts are the refusal to purchase a specific good. Okay, so hey, you want to pass the Stamp Act? Not a problem. Guess what? We're not going to buy paper anymore. All right, so now you're losing out on money, England. And until you guys decide that you're going to make it a little bit more fair, we're going to continue these boycotts. Well, although the boycotts are still going on, a number of colonial leaders want to get together and meet. And this is where the Stamp Act Congress comes in. Okay, colonial leaders from a number of colonies are actually going to meet in New York City to discuss where do we go from here. Knowing full well that the boycotts are still going on, knowing full well that a lot of colonists are upset, the Stamp Act Congress talks about a lot. Should they have representation in Parliament? Should they attempt to try to govern themselves? Should they send a message to England to say that they're not going to stand for this type of treatment? But the one thing the Stamp Act Congress is going to do is they're going to discuss mainly the Stamp Act and as to why it's unfair. So they decide to write a petition. Okay, a petition can be a formal request. Okay, a petition if I wanted a stop sign to be put in my neighborhood. Okay, I can go to the town of Hempstead, and the town of Hempstead is going to say, well, get 500 signatures. Okay, that's a petition. Okay, 500 people agree that a stop sign needs to be put in front of Mr. Kirk's house. Okay, now that doesn't mean that that stop sign's going to happen just because I get the signatures, but it goes to show the town of Hempstead that, hey, there's a lot of people that agree with Mr. Kirk. So they decide to write a petition. It's a formal request to have the act, the Stamp Act, repealed. Now, when this gets to England in Parliament, Parliament's put in a little bit of a difficult position because A, they know the boycotts are going on, B, they're losing out on money, and C, they're concerned about their response. Because if A, they decide to ignore this petition, the boycotts are going to only continue and they're going to continue to lose out on money. If they adhere to the petition, if they listen and give in to the colonies and they say, you know what, you guys have a point, we're going to repeal the Stamp Act, that sets a very dangerous precedent. The precedent would be that, hey, if they got the Stamp Act repealed, what says that they wouldn't ask to have the Quartering Act or the Sugar Act or the Navigation Acts repealed? Because once you make a concession for one, what says you can't make a concession for another? All right, and that could be applied to a number of different examples. All right, if over there in row 6, 2 of your cell phones go off in the middle of class, and I say one go to detention and the other one, don't worry about it, well, that's kind of unfair. So you set a dangerous precedent when you do something for one and not the other. So England's response is in response to the Stamp Act Congress, but in many ways it's not. Because what the Stamp Act Congress does in writing this petition is it allows England to dictate the narrative a little bit. So in England, Parliament decides that they are going to repeal the Stamp Act. They're going to take it away. All right. But they're essentially saying we're not repealing it because you asked us to. We're repealing it because we decided that that's what we want to do. And essentially what then comes out of Parliament is a new act in 1766, which in response to the repealing of the Stamp Act, England passes what is known as the Declaratory Act. The Declaratory Act, if you were to kind of cut that word in half, to declare, Britain is declaring that they have total control over the colonies. They're not making decisions because of boycotts or protests or petitions. They're making decisions because it's best for business. Okay? And they're making decisions that are not going to be influenced by the colonists in any way, shape, or form. Now, this isn't an actual tax. It isn't a way to save money. It's just simply a declaration that the colonies have no power. They have no say. They are colonies, and they are in sole existence to make the home country, and in this case, England, wealthy. Now, this act actually has a reversed effect in the colonies. Because when the colonists get word of this, yes, they celebrate the idea that the Stamp Act is repealed. But at the same time, it kind of brings them closer together. That they're coming out to say, hey, we got together, we asked for something, and Britain's ignoring us, that they're doing this on their own, but we had no say in this. So in reality, the Declaratory Act is going to bring the colonies closer together, to work much more closer together in trying to make their get their point across to Great Britain. Now, with the Stamp Act repealed, again, conversations continuing in England, and in 1767, Charles Townshend, the British Chancellor here to the colonies, comes up with this idea that it would be best to begin to implement small taxes against things that constantly come into the colonies. Things like glassware, things like fancy china, lead, paint, even paper, even tea. Okay, all of these things are going to have little taxes on them. However, what England, to try to counteract the negativity that would surround it, England decides that they are no longer going to collect taxes on anything that is going on inside the colonies. All right, so only things that are brought in. So, for example, it would be like if New York State decided they were going to get rid of the sales tax in New York State. So what you buy for something, like we said yesterday, at $1.99, it's going to be $1.99. But anything that's brought into the state, all right, into from a foreign country, there might be a tax that is imposed. Okay, but if it's something made in the state of New York and sold in 7-Eleven for $1.99, there's going to be no sales tax. Now, that's kind of fair, all right, because products made here in the colonies would be a little bit cheaper, but at the same time, how do the colonists feel about this? This is insulting to them. Okay, they feel as though that this is a direct violation of the idea that they are English citizens living in colonies. Okay, From England's point of view, they believe that they would be able to make £50,000 within 6 months off of these taxes. £50,000 today would be equivalent to, over $100,000 today. But in many ways, it is going to have the opposite effect. With the passing of the Townsend Acts, essentially what begins to happen is that more protests and even more boycotts are going to take place. The English aren't going to make nearly half the money that they thought, taxing the colonies on things that were brought in, on things like tea and lead and paint, as I just said. But instead, what you're going to begin to see is colonists continue to resort to smuggling, bringing things in and selling them below market value. And also, what it is going to do is it's going to bring the colonies closer together. The Sons of Liberty that I mentioned on the last slide is becoming more vocal and a very popular group here in Massachusetts, and now becoming a popular group throughout the colonies. Now, because there are colonists that are resorting to smuggling to try to sell many of these products that I listed here, okay, there is a concern on the British standpoint that these colonists are breaking the law. So what England is going to do is order thousands of more troops into these many of these colonial cities, and they are going to issue what was known as a writs of assistance. The writs of assistance essentially was government court orders that was going to allow Britain and British troops to search homes for illegal goods, or if they thought that you potentially had smuggled tea or smuggled sugar, that they didn't need a search warrant, that they could just come into your home and say, we are going to search your home. Now, that is in today's day and age, as far as America is concerned, that would be a direct violation. Okay, if a police officer knocked on your door tonight and said, we'd like to search your house, you should probably let them in. I'm sure you have nothing to hide. But theoretically speaking, police officers would need a search warrant, which is a court order, okay, that says that there is probable cause and there is suspicion, okay, to search your home. Okay, but no one can just simply barge into your home and say that we're going to search it without a probable cause. What the writs of assistance is saying is that England doesn't need a probable cause. So it puts the colonists on edge. And how would you feel living in a city in a time of peace with over 2,000 troops, like in, say, in Boston, living there, standing guard, checking homes, quartered by and having being housed by separate different colonists? This is going to be a pretty big deal. And specifically, I keep alluding to Boston, which is really going to become the hotbed for these tensions that exist between the British and the colonies, all right, with the passing of the Declaratory Act, with the passing of the Townsend Acts, and with the organization with the Sons of Liberty for these protests and boycotts. A lot of eyes are going to be on Boston. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at something that was known as the Boston Massacre. Okay, now when we hear that, you'll probably think, oh my goodness, it was a terrible thing on the part of the British or the colonists, but there's a very big theme of this section. There is the reality of a situation and the perception, and sometimes the perception is more important than the reality or the gravity of the situation. So we'll get into that tomorrow. So here's what I'm going to ask that you do. In your classwork folder, I have sent out to you an Acts review sheet. Okay, I want you to fill out the first page of that. We're going to go over that in class tomorrow as part of our classwork when I return. So fill out the first part of it. If you don't finish it by the time class ends, make sure you finish it for homework. Okay. In addition, if you are able to finish that, again, the first 3 acts. Okay, both pages, and I'll explain the sheet when you get it. If you finish that, start on your section 2 homework questions, and those are due on Monday. All right, so we'll stop here. Tomorrow we get into the Boston Massacre and the fallout from what is to be the Boston Massacre, and to me, one of the more interesting stories to tell here. All right, again, I'll be in my office after school. If anyone has any questions, feel free to stop by. All right, make sure, as always, okay, you say thank you for your sub, and please make sure you are on your best behavior. Yes, that means you in the back. Yes, that means you that has a guilty conscience right now. Thank you.